follow up with a conversation led by film director Adriāna Roze. Please welcome on the stage. And I also would like to welcome on the stage the co-founder of Mission C, Andrea Orsag, and the head of the Tech and Society of the Tony Blair Institute, Max Beverton-Palmer. Please come on the stage. We'll give you microphones.
Thank you, Eva. So I'll stand with you while the chairs are approaching. And now we can synchronize and sit down. Okay, hello everybody. I'm happy to see here at this room people who are actually really interested in the future, not only in the moment right here, right now, which is fantastic. So let's talk business, or so to say, future of business. So in the best traditions of neoliberal capitalism, so far entrepreneurship had been about profit and success, which is still good and necessary result. But now when we are facing challenges brought up by the fourth industrial revolution and digital economy, we need to actually make fundamental change about where our priorities are in order to create sustainable business. So that's, from my point of view, what this panel is going to be about. Of course, a lot of you here are also technology enthusiasts, or you're working in a field that's somehow related to technology, but you have to take into account that accelerated development of digital technologies is one of the main reasons for the rise of social inequalities, unemployment, the crisis, including financial crisis, and environmental. But at the same time, exactly, technologies might also become the tool for overcoming these problems. So can we fix these issues by changing the way economy is run? So that's why I have fantastic people here talking about it. We need new solutions, new concepts, ideas. We just heard one idea from Armin. I'm going to encourage you to ask questions at any time. Most probably you won't, because most of you are Latvians, so we know how it goes. But if someone feels like courageous enough to ask question, please raise your hand, and I bet someone will give you a microphone, because we would really like to have it as a purposeful discussion. So my first question to my panelists is, what is the future of economics? So which direction would you like the field to evolve? So I'll start with Andrea. Have your own. Congrats.
Yeah, wow, this is a really good question, also super broad. So loved your presentation, Armin. And I really do think that going forward, we completely have to rethink what we were used to up till now. So I'm a huge fan, and I'm a huge fan and evangelist of circular economy, and that's actually completely reviving the whole economic system from the linear model where we are right now, which pretty much means we take the resources, create the products, use them, throw them away, and we really need to change to a circular economy where we are using resources way better, much more smartly, more efficiently. We're not creating waste, but instead we're creating new materials that can be further reused. So for me, yeah, we definitely have to change the whole economic model. That will come definitely in line with the ownership as well. We really need to convince a lot of shareholders to change that, because a lot of money is involved. And for now, I will just leave it here.
Sure. Armin, so... Oh,
I spoke already, so maybe...
Okay, fantastic. Then, Max, so answering this question, you beforehand, maybe you could also say, what do you do? What is your occupation?
Sure. So I'm the kind of politics person, I guess, on this panel. So these guys have the great ideas, and the job of the Tony Blair Institute is to, what we term, connect the change makers with the policymakers. So the change makers and the people building new companies and services, and make them have a proper dialogue with the policymakers. Because we really believe in the power of government to make changes in society, and that in order to change our world. Governments and politics needs to do that, but there's been a failure in politics over the last kind of decade, if not further. Populism is, in our view, derived from pessimism about society, and in order to recreate a kind of radical vision of change, you need to kind of latch onto ideas like the circular economy, steward ownership, and create them into a kind of politically tangible manifesto. So I guess in a broad way, to answer your initial question, you change the economies through political movements, and you remake institutions that support these ideas. So you do that through kind of regulation, through international agreements. Don't have all the solutions, but the first step is definitely that dialogue.
Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about regulations a little bit further ahead during this discussion, but Armin, would you like to contribute to this question? Of course, Stuart, the ownership is obviously the way you would lobby now at the moment.
Yeah, I think I cannot add too much to what I said already. I can just say that if you look at Denmark, where you have so many steward-owned companies, you see really a difference how they behaved during the financial crisis, for example, which was at least the moment for me where I really realized, being still young and at school, oh, you know, the system doesn't work, something is wrong here. But it's interesting that if the companies, it doesn't need only other regulation on the top level, you know, for banks, maybe it just needs other regulatory frameworks for the micro level, for the companies, how they work, and suddenly you have more long-term oriented companies that don't follow very strange trends during the financial crisis.
In other words, summing up also your presentation, what you're saying is, in a way, you're encouraged to giving power back to people.
Yeah.
So can we talk about this? How practically, exactly we can do that? Because you named several great and fantastic examples, but do all of you really think that it would be possible in the case of every company, and should it be needed?
Well, maybe the important thing is with steward ownership, all these companies are not, you know, just giving all the power back to every employee, but it really differs. Some companies like John Lewis in the UK are doing it quite democratically. They say every employee who's working here is a partner as long as he or she works here, and then when they leave, they are not anymore a partner. But other companies like Bosch say, well, we have a certain selection mechanism or election mechanism, how certain people are selected that are stewards for a certain time, and after 7 years they have to be reappointed. Some do it very meritocratically, some do it democratically. I think what is really the success to empower people is to align emotional ownership with the legal ownership. You have so many, I hear often people who decentralize their ownership to many employees. They say, oh, they don't identify with the company. Then it was too early. Then, you know, they're not empowered. They just have a more burden. They suddenly need to vote on things, etc. That doesn't empower them. It only makes sense to go as far as people emotionally also can go. So yeah, that's what I would say regarding the legal empowerment. First is the emotional empowerment, and then, you know, then map the emotional ownership with the legal ownership.
I think it's really great because we're completely on the same page. All of us really realize something has to change. The system has to change. The economic model has to change. And I'm really very hopeful that all those companies you've been mentioning, and hopefully many more to follow, are definitely the way to go. At the same time, we also have to just kind of acknowledge that there are still those giants that unfortunately are not behaving necessarily what we would categorize as purposeful. I'm talking here about the large oil and gas companies, for instance. And even though, of course, we now need oil, right? Like our economy literally runs on it. Even though everyone's talking about those changes, we're talking about the climate change. It's a great topic. Many people are getting involved. So many solutions being mentioned also on the stages today. Did you know that just within the last 3 years, actually the large investment firms invested more than $1.7 trillion into oil and gas to further progress? Just let it sink. we're talking here a lot about like investments into purpose, into goods, and that needs to happen. But where is really this like huge bank of money? It's really with those investors, with investment firms. And that's not necessarily going the way we want it to.
And that's all of us, as I said. It's 90%, it's pension funds and insurance companies. It's our money that's invested in gas and oil.
I was going to say there's also like a political challenge you need to get over. I think it was really interesting what you were saying about people telling you that this just isn't the way the world works. And I think instinctively a lot of people, maybe not people in this room because you've come to a session called Impact for Good, but in general people in the world will go, well, that sounds really lovely, but how is that something that can actually work for us in society? So winning that political argument is going to be important, and then you can kind of change, you can get the legitimacy, governments can get the legitimacy to force changes in ownership structure and to embed that purpose within companies.
As for good news, we also do see that investors are generally becoming more and more interested to see what are the strategies for companies to be here also going forward, so the long term. There is, for instance, this like NGO from UK called CDP, and every year they're publishing reports for the investors to see what are the strategies of stock-listed companies when it comes to use of natural resources, so water being really important there as well, and decarbonization strategies as well. So that's really great to see. However, one thing is to really look into what are the long-term strategies, and whenever you talk to someone from asset management, especially the portfolio managers, the whole system around their incentives is still a little bit messed up, because those guys are being rewarded based on what's the return on investment on a yearly basis. So we're looking here at the difference between long-term, so sustainability and solving climate crisis, versus the short-term. And we also need to change completely the system of rewarding people, because right now it's way beneficial for them just to look into indexes linked to all those fast return, great return companies that are not necessarily purposeful.
But we're talking about like changes and things that we need to change, and we agree on a lot of questions. But what would be a practical, realistic steps that we could do?
So we have a lot of power as consumers to change the culture of organizations and to incentivize businesses to be a bit different. That doesn't mean that they're going to change the ownership model, but it might change the culture of an organization to focus more on responsibility, which then can lead to openings for more radical options. I said this in the other panel I was on. Corporate social responsibility in the world of business has been for the last kind of 10, 15 years very much about just doing something that looks good for your brand. In the UK, it might be like investing in school sport when you're Mars, for example, which is great. It brought a lot of money into school sport. But was it really linked to Mars's business, or were they really tackling some of the problems that are inherent to healthy lifestyles or sport? No. But I think what we're seeing now is a bit more of a focus on corporate social responsibility, which is intrinsically linked to the business. So I worked for Sky, which had a big program of saving the oceans through kind of reducing plastic waste. And what Sky did was radically change its supply chain to take all plastics out and to talk to manufacturers in China to make a difference. And that kind of cultural change is not the answer to these problems, but it can create the culture that can lead to further opening.
I really strongly believe what we're having right now, it's a problem for all of us. So we're all in this together, and therefore I'm a really strong believer that it's the system that has to change. It's definitely the business as usual that has to change. We have to change, all of us together. At the same time, I think because of the impact, and we can quite pinpoint clearly where the impact is, it's the large corporates. And therefore, we really need to hold them accountable. They really need to take the responsibility and drive the change. With their impact, international operations, if they're able to change something, that would be really tremendous. And at the same time, as much as consumers need to change and adapt to different lifestyles, those corporates have such a tremendous power to make it way easier for them. And it's not only good for hugging the trees, it's actually really great also for their business case, as we can see more and more those days.
I maybe would like to disagree a little bit on that, because I think that's a little bit disempowering to just say it's the corporate giants that need to change. And, you know, at at least in Germany, 90% of the companies are small and medium-sized companies, not the corporate giants. You know, I think the majority is employed by these forms of companies. Yes, the corporate giants are maybe well known because these are brands that we see all over, but they are not the companies that stay for long. For example, the average lifespan of an S&P 500 company, so of a very big corporate company, is 17 years. You know, that's about the lifespan, by the way, of cow, or yeah, it's not a very long lifespan. And if you compare that, for example, to Stewart-owned companies, Bosch with 130 years. In 130 years, they had 7 CEOs. So one CEO was longer there than one of these corporate giants from America. So I think these companies are changing, and they are more or less bound to die sooner or later. So it's more about what do we build now? What kind of new things do we build that replace these old systems? Because these old systems sometimes really are so heavy and so difficult to change that I wouldn't say, let's focus on them.
No, I just want to clarify. I meant generally business as usual.
Yeah.
Any type of company right now, I
Yeah.
really wish all of them would be driven by purpose.
Before I ask the last question, is there any questions from the audience? There is, fantastic, one brave Latvian, or I yet don't know whether Latvian or maybe some Latvian. Okay, good for Latvia.
Hi. I have my own social enterprise also in Latvia. And therefore, maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm not so optimistic. So you answered the question, how would you envision the world in a perfect scenario? But what do you think in reality is actually going to happen, and where will the world go? Not like in this nice dream, but more in reality.
So more of a nightmarish vision of reality.
Shall I start with that one? I think we have to choose where we want it to go. I think, where do you think the world will actually go? I'll leave them to answer on their particular models, but politically, it's looking very bleak at the moment, but as I said at the beginning, like, if we're all led by pessimism, then there's no movement for change, and we need to embrace sensible but radical politics that changes the institutions that haven't worked for people's lives over the last kind of 20 years. So we have to envisage a world where these things are possible in order to create it. It sounds a bit trite, but I mean, we are all kind of the motors of political change as well, and we as kind of Armin said, like, it's our money that's going into these businesses to invest.
Armin?
Well, I can just tell you from Berlin, in Berlin we have Rocket Internet, maybe you know that, and many people go there because they think that's where they can get rich and become famous, etc., start a company with the Sumverse. Interestingly, there's now a new generation of founders who don't want to go there, who once they were there, they don't want to go there again, because they have a different, because the currency that really pays them, that what they want, is not so much more millions, but purpose. They want something that just makes sense in the world. They see all the things that are happening and that are problematic on the world, and they think, well, I want to contribute to that a little bit. And so I can just say I'm quite optimistic at the moment, at least for a certain part, because when we are organizing events for this very radical idea of steward ownership, we have, just in 5 days, we had 1,500 startup entrepreneurs registering in Berlin to come to one evening just on steward ownership, where they can learn from others how to do that. And so there's an entire generation, I would say, that hasn't grown up maybe in the society of scarcity, where they have to think the whole time about, or where the brain is occupied with how to generate wealth for themselves, but where they are more free to really think about something that makes sense. And all of them, they start businesses to change the world and not primarily in order to get rich. And if we get more of these people, and I think the next generation, at least in Western Europe, is going in this direction, the currency that pays people will be exchanged from, you know, just monetary value to purpose, and that is already something you see in the markets for talents, that, you know, all the companies are suddenly purpose washing themselves and saying we're there for a purpose, because that's the only way they get the good people. But of course everybody understands that's not true. They're just purpose washing. In the end, they're there for the shareholders. So I think in the future the competitive advantage will be to be actually a purpose-driven company that has an ownership structure that ensures that you're actually there for a purpose. And so I think, you know, at least for a certain part of the world, I'm quite optimistic that because of the new generations that are coming, we will find a way to cure the problems in our economy.
And I'm on board with the chance, as they mentioned. People want to work for companies that are meaningful, that really make sense. On top of that, we do have really fabulous technologies in place that can really help us to get there. And just to really kind of wrap it up, there's no other way. We have to change. It's literally our life that's at a stake here. We're really talking something really large. So the only question that remains is, will we change?
I'll just add that in a way, not only we have to change, but additionally, Generation Z that you were talking about that already came into the market, I think in a way will force us to change, because the way they envision entrepreneurship is totally different from that what we are having at the moment. And not only they are requiring businesses that are purposeful and meaningful, they really want to see the results, but also in most of the cases, they see themselves as entrepreneurs instead of labor. So that's going to, I think it's going to be also a really interesting situation when businesses will have to hire people, and I think we're going to be in a lack of them, because everyone is going to be want to be an entrepreneur. Unfortunately, the time is up. Maybe some other questions that we haven't touched upon during this. Okay, now I see Latvian audience. Very typical. But thank you so much. I would encourage you not to be shy and look up these guys once they will be off the stage, and ask your questions to them, because they really know what they are talking about. So thank you so much for being here with us at the Digital Freedom Festival. Yeah.
Thank you.